What's up? Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of ASAP, your Afrikan Social Activism Playbook. I am one of your hosts, T. Jamal, joined by my lovely sister, Michelee. What's going on today?
Hey brother, I'm doing pretty good. It's been I don't know what hasn't really been a very eventful day. Just another day of the week for me. But yeah, I'm feeling nice and healthy and glad to be, you know, all together. So,
It
but how
is
about
the
how's everything going for you this week?
everything is cool. It's
Mm,
Friday. It's also the second day of October. It's also about 1 month away from an election
right?
in the
Woo.
United States. And, it's I think it's necessary for us to really talk about the importance of, I think we've been doing it the entire time, like the importance of the electoral process, participating in it, but not passively participating in it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So yesterday we talked about Breonna Taylor, and again, we will continue to demand justice for Breonna Taylor, and rest in peace to her and prayers to her and her family. But when it comes to situations like a Breonna Taylor, like a police violence against Black people, if we are going to, if we want to be a part of the solution, we have to understand the system that we're in and
Absolutely.
understand how to battle it within the confines of where we're staying, especially if we are here in the United States, right?
Mhm.
There's only so much you can do from the outside, and but we also have to know what they're doing, how they're doing it, and really just understand those rules. And that's what we are going to be really focusing on a lot today. But how are you doing overall, just as a person?
Yeah, I mean, it's always tough. Um, just considering just everything how things are. It's I don't fe it's one of those things where it's like, I'm not okay until we all okay. So it's always a heavy feeling that I have, but I feel that um I don't know, better days should come. I hope sooner than later, than much later, but it just it has to take a lot, of understanding and just determination. So I mean, I feel as a person and you know, as my individual self, I'm doing as much as I can, like, as far as self-care and making sure I'm trying to keep my mental and spiritual and physical and everything together so that I can do, all that I need to do to provide for myself and my loved ones. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a full-time job because, as a Black person, as a Black man in America, you just have moments of just feeling like, "Ugh, what else do I have to deal with?
Right.
Can I get a break? Like, can I just live?" Like, it just seems like you take one step forward and get pushed back 5 steps.
Right.
And like we're just inching forward. But, as we look at things in context, and I love this series because in ASAP, we look at what our ancestors had to go through. We look at what they accomplished in the times that they were going through, and
Right.
then we see what we have now, and we really put value on how far we have come so we can look at it in the full context of it. So there is reason to hope, um you
Mhm.
know even though it feels
Definitely.
like there's a chokehold on us at sometimes,
Right.
and the
Right. And
chokehold
that's
is
why.
real.
Yeah, yeah. But that's why I want to, like, when it comes to some things, I want us to be careful. Like, we talk a lot about the language that we use. Like, we don't say slaves, right? They were people who were their condition their situation. They were enslaved, right? We have to be very careful about how we, you know, use these words and just speak of ourselves and our situations, you know, and it's very real how we, you know, we speak, you know, we can create our reality and stuff. You know, we constantly speaking negatively, you're going to constantly see negative results, right? Like that's just a day-to-day rule. Like, you know, we always see it. You know, whatever you believe in, whatever spiritual or, you know, whatever you believe in, that's just something that's just constant. Like you can feel that energy. It's just energy, right? That you're putting out and you get back. But I want us to be careful when we say certain things, like, you know, and we ask these questions because times are rough. You know, we're still struggling a lot, and our ancestors, our elders who are still alive, who went through all of this when they were younger, it was tough for them too. And so a lot of us, because, you know, naturally I think we'll question, like, you know, are we just fighting for nothing? Is it just supposed to be like this? You know, I
Right.
think we have to be very careful though when we ask, when we say stuff like, you know, well, all of this is not necessary. We don't, you know, it's just useless. Why fight and stuff like that? Because we have to realize, like we're going to get into today, talking about the length of time some of this stuff, you know what I mean? Like how much time and effort and blood, sweat, and tears, you know, and all of this stuff that it takes is not going to be overnight results. We have to understand that the system is very complex and is designed in a way to keep us oppressed. So if we do not want to be oppressed, it's going to take a lot of work. Like it took a lot of work to get us here, and it's going to take even more work to get us out of it. And so it just, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like it's the same thing going up and down stairs. It seemed like a breeze going down the stairs, but it was tough getting all the way up there, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
just yeah, it's something like that. You know, we have to realize though that it takes a level of um optimism and, you know, just faith, and you know what I mean, and understanding that we can get through it even if we don't see it. We don't see the light at the end of the tunnel yet. You know, it was very, very dim, you know, but I think we have to
Mm-hmm.
definitely just think about it as like a relay race, because even if we don't see success now, a lot of our elders and people who fought before, they didn't live to see what we are able to benefit from now. They didn't get to see
Right.
and live as comfortably as we get to live now, you know, with a lot of the fear and stuff
Mm-hmm.
that we don't have. That a lot of our people had to, you know, they had to die for us, you know. They didn't want to, but you know, that was the times. And so now we have to just take advantage of the times and the access and resources and things that we have to continue to fight for the next generation as
One
well.
of the things I think that happens is you hear a lot of people saying, when it comes to voting in particular, right? You'll hear people
Hmm.
say, well, your ancestors died for the right for you to vote, right? And
Right, right.
hearing that statement over and over again with no context, it
Yeah.
just becomes a cliche saying, and you kind of take it and it just washes off your back, and you're like, okay, yeah, people died for the right. But you don't really
Hmm.
understand the length of time, right?
Yeah.
And the efforts and the names and the faces. And when you put a name and a face to the person that died, it becomes
Right.
more real. It's like they say it's something weird in humans where you can have like a massive disaster that told like in, I don't know, like a hurricane or a tornado, and it killed
Hmm.
thousands of people.
Right.
And it's like that's a news story for like a day. But then
Hmm.
one person dying that you can put a name and a face to,
Yep.
like people mourn for, you know, days and months because it becomes real to you, because you can connect. There's an empathy to it, and there's a lack of empathy when it's a multitude of people and you can't really
Hmm.
put names and faces and familial connections to all of these
Yeah.
things. So,
Exactly.
but in reality, there are names and faces to all of those people. and
Right.
familial connections and people who are mourning each individual, even in that massive disaster, right? So the same thing happens when we're talking about our ancestors who have fought for on behalf of us in the past, presently, those who have given their lives for certain situations. And what we have been doing in this show is putting a name and a face and a historical context and a time period to when these things were happening. Like, it's not just 1965. And we're
Right.
going to talk about that, today. Because I wanted to just in the straight truth, no chaser, talk about the importance of this election that's coming up and voting. So one of the things we didn't get a chance to talk about is Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away like a week ago.
Right.
And she's a Supreme Court justice. I think she was, at the time of her appointment, the only woman on the Supreme Court. And that vacancy is very important right now, especially this year. It could either be the current administration that replaces her seat or a next administration if we get a next administration.
Right. Inshallah.
And that makes a big difference. Exactly. And it makes a big difference. And people don't understand, like, you can look at, oh man, that's just the president, or that's just Congress, or that's just the Supreme Court. They all work in tandem with one another. There's a reason that there are three heads in this political system. You have the legislative branch, you have the executive branch, and you have the judicial. And the judicial, they uphold the laws, and they can interpret the Constitution however they feel like it.
Yep.
However they feel. And if you've ever read a law, it's intentionally written so broad that it can be interpreted multiple different ways by different lawyers and different judges in different situations.
Absolutely.
So, and we're gonna pull up a law in a minute.
Yeah.
But
I think it's important to understand that it's like you got to think of it like it's like a living thing, almost like it's evolving.
Right.
You can manipulate it, you can change, you know what I mean? Like, it's when we get to talking about like it's good, things change. It can be manipulated.
There are two Supreme Court cases that are very important to Black people. And both of them are regarding the exact same situation, ruled on differently by two different Supreme Courts. So we have Plessy versus Ferguson, that the Supreme Court came away with that and saying separate but equal. And pretty much said that segregation is legal according to the Constitution of the United States. And then you fast forward to 1954, and you have Brown versus Board, and then you have another set of 9 Supreme Court justices who, about maybe like 30 years, 40 years later, who say, nah, they were wrong. Segregation is not legal according to the Constitution. So you see, that's the same situation. It's the same thing. But different judges on that, who hold those seats in different time periods, interpreted the law based on the arguments that were levied by the lawyers. They saw it differently. So, and they were more amenable in that time period to hear us out as to why segregation was not constitutional and how it was inflicting and negatively impacting the lives of people. So in that same way, when you have certain presidents who can appoint a lifetime seat, remember, once you are on the Supreme Court, the only thing that can get you off of the Supreme Court is death.
Die. Yeah.
So It's a lifetime appointment that you sit on this seat as a judge, and not just a judge in simple cases, a judge in national, federal cases that impact the entirety of the country.
Right.
So
and just think about how concentrated it is, right? Like it's not like a whole room of people. This is just a small council of people who have all of this power. Yeah. And think about that. Like think about it only takes a few people thinking a certain way, right? And then you can influence. I don't know. It's a lot, but we have to think about how it's a lot, but it's pretty simple. You know what I mean? Like when we break it down, you'll be able to see just how, like the importance of it, right? Like it's very important. You don't have to be a political scientist or anything else, you know, to understand how important it is to us. And just when we add in the history and seeing the years and the efforts to discriminate and to block people, to lock people out, you should take it even that much more, you know, seriously, just understanding how difficult they'll make it for us to be able to participate in this process. So, I mean, it's a lot, bro. It's a lot.
So in the Straight Truth No Chaser, what I want to talk about and the people I want to talk to are the people who say, what's the point, right? What's the point of being politically involved? What's the point of being engaged? What's the point of voting? It's not just because some random faceless, nameless people died for you to have the right to do it.
Right.
It's because, first of all, power does not concede without a struggle. So if there wasn't any power in our ability to use our constituency to set our own agenda, then there would be no reason for them to withhold it from certain people.
Right.
They wouldn't be threatened by our access to the vote. They wouldn't be pleading for our votes right now.
All the pandering and everything that we
trying to pander to us to get our vote. Right. So there is power in it. The thing is, we just have not been utilizing it the right way. And of course, this is ASAP. So we take plays from those that came before us. And it's funny, we talked about David Walker, Mariah Stewart. We talked about Martin Delaney, Paul Cuffey yesterday. And we talked about how it seems like right after enslavement, we were a lot more knowledgeable of the reality of the way this system works than we are now that we have been educated in their school system.
Yeah.
Because we talked about it a couple of shows ago that the education system in the United States is not broken. It works the way that they want it to work. It's not supposed to educate you. It's supposed to train you to be a good follower. They train you. They tell you to go to college and get a good job. They want you to be an employee, not a CEO. And so they also want you to have the mind of an employee in your citizenship and in your life. So they don't want you to know how the sausage is made, how the government is really run, what your vote really means. They just want you to participate and, you know, buy into the propaganda and buy into the media. But if you actually know the behind the scenes and you know the rules and you know what you can do and what you're in and how much influence you actually hold, then you actually become a factor.
Right.
Then people have to start considering what you're saying and how you're moving and really, okay, we have to talk to these people in this way. We have to come to them correctly. And it comes with funds, it comes with money, but it also comes with understanding how these things function.
Right.
And I brought up that time period because 1870, so 1865 is the 13th Amendment, the emancipation of us from enslavement. Enslavement is abolished. So that's the 13th Amendment. That's the first one that is the most relevant to us as Black people.
Right. 1865.
The 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment is 1868 that is ratified. And that's the one that gave us the right to be citizens of the United States as Black people. Okay.
3 years later.
That came with a little something. And then 2 years after that, 1870 is the 15th Amendment, which gave us the right to vote.
Gave now, black men the right to vote, right? 1870. Yeah.
You're right.
It said the black
men because no women at the time could vote
at all.
Right. So I want to actually just read the 15th Amendment, because sometimes, just like Ava DuVernay did us a huge favor in making us actually read the 13th Amendment and understand everything that it says. Reading the 15th Amendment, let's read it and then see, is there, because like I talked about legalese and how some of these amendments in the Constitution itself is like very difficult to read. But it seems like this 15th Amendment is pretty short. Section 1, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Section 2, the Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. Now, that seems fair. That seems very, very straightforward. Like, okay, you were enslaved. That doesn't play a factor. Okay, you're Black. That doesn't play a factor. And we have given Congress the power to make sure that they can legislate this. And they said federally and by state. So we in the 1870s, from 1870 to 1877, during the time of Reconstruction, we had Black political people, we had Black elected officials, we had people running offices, we had the first Black person elected to the Senate and in Congress and, you know, state legislatures and all these things that were, you know, advancing the Black community. And you saw from 1865, we are just thrown off the plantation and told to make do with our lives. Right. And then, okay, we're given citizenship, then we're given the right to vote. And then we just start begging on America. Like, we start to advance economically. We start advancing politically. And I'm talking about these are time periods that people do not talk about. They don't even talk about it in Black History Month because they try to, what they do is, and we talked about it before, they make it seem like everything happened on this flat surface, like it was all one time period.
Right.
And the reason I'm using these years, these dates, so we're looking at 1865, 1868, 1870. Reconstruction ends in 1877. In 7 years, the federal troops leave the South, and then they leave us to our own. And in that time period, it took like a snap for Jim Crow to start.
Right.
Because Jim Crow didn't start. There were no Black codes during the time of Reconstruction because they had federal soldiers protecting our interests as we moved around freely, as we were able to build economic stability, as we were able to sustain political advancement. So federal officers leave, and then all of a sudden, almost like overnight, you have people literally getting kicked out of their political offices, like literally locked out of their office. And some of them are set on fire. Some of them are like their lives are threatened. Some of them are brutally beaten by mobs of, white Southerners who
they run out of town. They get run out of town.
They could not stand to see the advancement that we were making right beside them.
Right.
And we're constantly told as Black people in this current time, let's fast forward to 2020, pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. Now, you tell me that from 1870 to 1877, the advancements that we made wasn't some bootstrap pulling, and we didn't even have shoes coming out of enslavement.
Exactly.
And we're going to spend this next.
We were thrown off. That's the thing. You just said it, like how immediately after, and it just also considering that, while we celebrate Juneteenth, right? Like the fact that some people, some of us were still not aware of our freedom, but then, regardless of that, we were straight off of the plantation with nothing. We didn't have the opportunity to be building wealth and, having property or anything like that. So just think about like homelessness, people, where did they have to go? People, and, and it's also a lot that comes out of that is just understanding how we have to stick together, that the unity and stuff, and just understand that we had to make do, we had to make something out of nothing, basically, as you just said, we didn't even have boots.
Right.
Yeah. So, but we made it happen. Like you said, we made it happen. There was a lot of progress, like you said, in the political, educational, economical, like we just had to make it happen. We pulled together and we were doing our thing, And
so with that advancement, though, came power that we were wielding very responsibly and advancing our own communities. And it became a threat to those in the South who were the people who enslaved us. Their whole reality was based on the fact that we were inferior to them. So our advancement threatened their entire mentality. Everything that they clung to value themselves, we were disproving. So they had to fight back. So that's when you see things like the KKK come to in existence. That's when you start to see these Jim Crow laws that, and let's talk about this. Jim Crow lasted from around the late 1870s all the way until like the almost 100 years, like into the 1960s,
yeah, exactly.
So
almost the 1970s, pretty much.
Right. So we're talking about a time period of them dialing us back. So to prevent us from voting, there were things that were put in place in certain states, Alabama, Mississippi, your Georgias, your southern states, the rest. You had to take literacy tests. Now, coming fresh out of enslavement, a lot of people were illiterate.
Right. We're not able to learn how to read. It was illegal.
We're not legally able to learn how to read. So now you're putting a barrier of having to know how to read to get access to the right to vote. Now, let me just read the 15th Amendment again.
They had some states implemented like the taxing to
taxes
be able to vote.
There was a grandfather rule put in that if your grandfather was enslaved and he couldn't vote, that means that you can't vote.
Right.
Now, let me just go back to the 15th Amendment and see. So the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So all of these things are illegal, but they are laws that are put in states' books. This is the this is the political power that we held, that they were and are still now trying to hold from us. There's not a mistake in that. That's not unintentional. It's not because it doesn't matter either.
Right.
But go ahead, finish your point.
I think it's important to go back to just, roll back a little bit. You stated how the federal troops left the South, right? These southern states where enslavement and all that, was very heavy. And that was 1877, right? And we have to think about that. Think about the fact that these federal troops were needed to stay there and to see that these newly freed, Black people were able to go about their lives, right, without being, basically going back, staying with the same people. They're still in the same areas with the people who enslaved them, who, abused them and everything like that. So of course we have to think about, just because a law changed doesn't mean it changed the hearts and minds, and it doesn't enforce all of that stuff. It just says legally, right, on paper, you can't do this anymore. But think about the fact that these folks felt like they lost their whole life. When you hear these people that's talking about make America great again, this is what they're talking about, is that the times when they were able to just rule and make the rules, however, like that just benefited them, into where we didn't have those freedoms. And so you have to think about how just still in 2020, how they're still holding on to that spirit. And these are people who weren't even born there, who weren't even living way back then, but they're still holding on to that, that feeling. And so think about how it was back then. Literally the next day, you wake up and now you don't have these people enslaved anymore. You can't just tell these people what to do, what they can't do. And so that's hard for them, right? But we have to think about the fact that these troops, they were there to protect us and they left. So what do you expect when they leave? They can't enforce, right? So what did you expect, to happen? You're still left with your abusers, right there with no protection.
Yeah. So here we are, and I want to talk about the context of this, right? The historical context in these time periods. So we talked about Ida B. Wells and her chronicling and really reporting on all of the lynchings that were happening. And a lot of times people think people were getting lynched during enslavement. No, because legally we were viewed as property, and we were an asset. We were pretty much these people's wealth, their claim to wealth, the amount of enslaved Africans they held, right? So why would they be killing them? They weren't just throwing away their so-called property. So they weren't killing us during enslavement. It was when we had our freedom and we were no longer an asset to them because we were no longer their property, that they found reasons to just murder us, especially those of us who were economically sustained and politically advanced. Those are the people. They weren't just random people. Sometimes it was just mobs, but a lot of times they were very curated attacks on people who had influence in the community, who had a voice, who was making some moves as to book break and silence the rest of us. So I bring that up because these are things that we dealt with from the time that Reconstruction ended all the way until the modern civil rights movement.
Right.
We have been fighting for the 15th Amendment to be upheld from 1877 to 1965 when we got the Voting Rights Act. That's almost 100 years. That we finally convinced the federal government to intervene again. They left, federal troops left in 1877. The next time we hear the federal law mandate the protection of the black people's right to vote is 1965.
Yep.
Right? So just take that in. 1865 is emancipation. So 100 years later, we're just now getting another federal mandate of our protection of our right to vote that outlaws the literacy test, that outlaws all of the Jim Crow laws. And now, just a couple of years ago, the Supreme Court had to uphold the Voting Rights Act of 1965 again to add some extra protections to it, because it's just an act.
Right.
It's not a law. Even though the 15th Amendment is national law, we still needed the Voting Rights Act of 1965 on top of that to add extra protection when the 15th Amendment is very clear as to what it states.
Right. That was very clear. It should have been very clear, right? Like what else? But that's we talked about this yesterday with the wordplay, how we have to know the language that they use, and that's how we have to play this game, is understanding the language and the wordplay, right? And when they are able to just shift things around by wording things a certain way, we have to be aware of that. We have to pay attention and understand, like we're talking about in this segment, how this thing, these things constantly change. You better believe that we're fighting to get things changed for us, right? That'll benefit us. You better believe there are always people who are against us who will also be working on things to constantly put up another border. We have to constantly be knocking these walls down, because they're always going to be built to keep us locked out.
Exactly. And like you said before, there were people who were fighting in that 100-year time period constantly, every decade, right?
We never stopped.
Some of them did not live to see the Voting Rights Act of 65, but they didn't say, I'm not going to see it, so I'm not going to fight for it.
Right, right.
The reason that we got that far in that 100 years is because people were fighting the entire time on the behalf of people that they would never meet.
Right.
We have today certain rights and abilities to use that those who fought for them never saw.
Imagine the things that they had to go through, right? Like even besides the of course the abuse, physical abuse and all of that, the humiliation. It was it's a show on Netflix called Explain, and they put out a episode recently talking about who gets the right to vote and everything. So they went over the history of of this voting process and how we were disenfranchised and everything. But this one woman on there was talking about how her grandfather, who had to go through the literacy test to vote, and he had a question that literally said, "How high is up?" That was his question to be able to pass, to vote. How high is up? Like, this is how ridiculous, right? But it was, you can't pass. How are you gonna pass that? Right. And we saw that like in Selma and stuff, right? They gave examples. They showed how, ridiculous this process was and everything, how they made it so difficult, but it was real. We don't have to go through stuff like that. Now, a lot of the issues that we're doing now that they're saying where they're throwing out a lot of ballots and stuff, you didn't like, on how we had to bubble in this answer or something like that. You have to do it all the way. Maybe you have to use a certain color ink or, or pencil or, whatever you had. Your name had to be exactly how it was on how they have your name in the system. Maybe you wrote your name or signed your name in the wrong place. Like, so it's still voter suppression and stuff going on. But imagine coming from that, it's not very different, but it's the same game, but it's just they changed the rules a little bit.
Yeah. And in college, I took one of those literacy tests. Like one of them, some of them, they had like a bunch of US history on them.
Yeah.
And it was questions that were so deep that it wasn't any textbook that I had ever read in U.S. history. Not college U.S. history, not high school, definitely not elementary school. I was like, and they were asking people who had, you know, just come out of enslavement or living in the Jim Crow South in the 1950s and 1940s to answer these questions. And they knew that, man, the people who probably administered the test couldn't answer those questions.
Exactly, right.
And it was like, it's like, this is just ridiculous. And so it was clear cut just to stop people having the right to vote. And so it's not just us on here talking about voting and how important voting is alone, because our constituency goes beyond the vote. It's bigger than just the vote. You have to vote, but you also have to understand the full context of your constituency, that it doesn't end after election day.
Right.
It doesn't start in the election year. Once the elected official is in office, there are things that we can still do to hold them accountable, no matter who the candidate is.
Exactly.
That's our job, to hold them accountable, to set our own agenda and make them, we're the puppeteers. We keep saying that. And this is what I'm going to continue to reiterate on this platform. The politicians are the puppets. We, the constituents, are the puppeteers. And if we don't have an agenda, if we don't have the strings and we're not controlling the puppet, then the puppet just does what they want to do.
Exactly.
And really, they don't. If you don't have a puppet on the string, it will sit idle. And we've all seen photos of C-SPAN where you got Congress people on Twitter and on Facebook during the sessions of Congress. If you're not holding your politicians accountable by calling them, by emailing them, by letter writing campaigns, and I'm talking about collective campaigns, 30 plus people with the same agenda, calling that same representatives from that district and saying, these are the things that we need. These are the things that we need. These are the things that we need. You're supposed to represent our interests. They're called representatives for a reason.
Yeah.
It's a representative democracy. They're supposed to represent that region, especially Congress. They're supposed to represent that region, that specific set of blocks. However, the lines are, gerrymandered for whatever election year they were elected. They're supposed to know that place. They're supposed to live there so that they know more, so that they bring more information to Congress when they start voting certain things, so that it impacts your community in a forward progressive direction. But sometimes, they play with the lines, right? So sometimes a politician might live in your area or your district one year, and then the next year they're not. And they play with those lines. And now that we know that they do that, it's called gerrymandering. Look it up. We need to hold them accountable when they're in office. Yeah, we just have to call them. And I'm talking about back to back to back, so much so that they can't ignore you. It has to be consistent. Can't just happen one time. It has to be a concerted effort where they know, oh, my constituents are going to hold me. And they're not going to vote for me the next time, or they're going to do this.
Right. They shouldn't even feel comfortable sitting there not doing anything, right? Not listening to the people who they're supposed to be representing. But again, I just said, not listening to, if we're not telling them anything, what do they have to listen to? Who do they have to listen to? And I think how we approach politics, how we come to understand politics. And again, it's not by mistake, right? We're not given a lot of education about this on purpose. Like, how you think, we're supposed to learn about it, like in school and stuff when we have these classes for it. And, and I think historically, just our people have just been basically scratching to survive. A lot of us, right? And a lot of us didn't have the energy, the time, the know-how ourselves. A lot of our elders and, our parents and grandparents and stuff, a lot of them didn't know a whole lot about the process. And so we carry on that ignorance, and it's about time that we wisen up and figure out what the system is and how to work it, right? Because some of us did understand, like it's like we said, throughout several generations, throughout every generation, there have been those of us who know, what to do. It just takes an effort. Like, that's why we have to move in a group. We have to know these rules. We have to know how to play by these rules so that we're not the pawns, right? They're supposed to be the puppets. Again, like you said, they're representatives. They have to represent us. We pay our taxes. We cannot sit up here and act like this stuff doesn't matter and that we're not represented and all, that we don't have any demands. You are working and paying your taxes just like every other citizen. You are doing everything, that you're supposed to do. You have these rights. Even if you're not doing anything, you have these rights as a citizen to be able to take advantage of these same things. And so we do have to take this very seriously and hold them accountable. Because I think we look at politics like it's something that happens to us and not something that we have to participate in. And again, like you said, it's something that we're constantly working on. It's not every 4 years when there's a general election. We have to constantly be paying attention to all of this stuff. Otherwise, we will be victimized. Why if we know the history of these people here, why would we expect them to do stuff out of good faith? It's work that we have to do.
And know the tricks of what they don't tell you. So you've probably heard recently a lot of social media people talk about voting locally and how that most importantly impacts your personal life, which is true. Right. But another reason to continue to vote locally is because those elections happen more often than just every 4 years. Right. So what they don't tell you is that if you don't vote for 2 cycles, you may have to re-register. I never had to re-register to vote because I've never missed a voting cycle. I vote every time there's an election. I don't care if it's the chairman or the alderman down the block for District 0. I don't know. I'm voting. Right. I got the voice. I'm voting. I'm going to look up who that person is. I'm going to vote for the candidate I think can do the job. I'm going to try to listen to what it is that they're saying. And then you have to hold them accountable. But we can't just let our voting registration lapse, because I've never had a voter suppression problem because they've never had any reason to turn me away, because I've never given them the opportunity to suppress my vote. Right. So we have to be diligent on that end too. Don't give them the opportunity, because they'll take it. They'll say, "Oh yeah, you didn't vote. You didn't vote 2 years ago, and you didn't vote 2 years before that. So you have to re-register. And now you live in another place, and you're like, okay, so how do I?" And now they making you jump through hoops, and you have to have an ID, and you have to do this, and you have to bring your passport and your social security card.
Right. Different forms of ID, proof of address, all kind of stuff. Like it's getting very crazy. But look at also it's other layers on top of that. Look at how in America, like how we have the most laws on the book, right? All of these different ways to shovel people into this, this criminal justice system. And when you got to really pay attention to, of this, because even when they gave us, during the 13th Amendment, and they talk about this in that Ava DuVernay documentary, how who's left out of that? People who are deemed criminals, right? So then immediately after enslavement was ended, you get people who are now being funneled into these prisons, right? And then once you're in prison, you get your rights taken away. You don't get the vote. And still, even today, there are a lot of people who, because they ended up in the criminal justice system, that they don't have their right to vote. There are states who are, people who are taking it very seriously. Like in Florida, I was seeing they were, they recently, like in recent years, got their the right to vote for a lot of ex-cons. And so we have to really, paying attention to who's really affected by stuff like that. Look at the people you are electing locally who have control. Because again, federally, they said that, you know, we should have these rights, but they leave it up to states still to this day. They're leaving a lot of things up to the states to decide. So if in Florida they're saying, you know, those politicians in Florida who have the power to say who can and can't vote, don't elect those people. Or when they're running, make sure that you're voting against them, right? Don't just let it pass. Like, they are for sure, you're for sure not going to block them if you don't do anything, right? So do whatever you can. We can't sit up there and forfeit and then be mad at the results. Don't forfeit your right, your voice that you do have, the little bit of power that you might have. Use it, please.
And I like that term you said, forfeit. We talk about sports a lot on this show because it's called the Social Activism Playbook. And we talk about running plays. If you forfeit the game, you lose.
You
automatically.
Lose. Right.
So if you complain about you having a losing record, but you forfeited, nobody is going to want to hear you say anything.
Who you gonna have to blame?
The same thing politically. If you don't show up, if you forfeit the game and then you complain about the administration or you complain about who's in office, nobody cares what you have to say because you didn't even try.
Right.
You didn't even put in the work that you had. Now we're talking about people who there are people who have to fight even to this day for their voting registration. They're being blocked from polls. They're trying to make it difficult for elderly people to vote because elderly people, a lot of them don't have driver's license. So a lot of them don't have IDs, but they have an address and they have, they're citizens.
Right.
And you just voluntarily not showing up to the polls.
It's already going to be people that
you have.
Exactly. It's already going to be people counted out because they can't travel. Like, think about the people who don't have transportation. And when they this voter suppression that we see, like, even look at them today, like they called for them to literally pull up the mailboxes off the street, the blue boxes off the street. A lot of people can't, they're trying to make a mockery of this whole thing, and just say like how mail-in voting is fraudulent and stuff like they're trying to do whatever they can. You're going to get a lot of people who can't. I was talking to a friend of mine who's in Atlanta, and she was talking about how the area that she lives in, she doesn't really have a problem. She can go to different places, schools or whatever nearby to cast her vote. But in her mother's neighborhood, that's not even that far from her, it's not very far from her. But in her mother's neighborhood, imagine if her mother doesn't have a car, can't move around, is disabled or something. They only have one polling place in that whole neighborhood. This is by design. So if you really got to think about this, like, as if you in a game, right? Like, if they pulling all of these stunts, they got holes in the field, they got these trick ropes and all kind of stuff like that. You got to be smart. Like, they are definitely playing defense. I mean, well, they playing defense for sure.
Yeah, exactly. It took me 3 hours to vote in the primaries.
I'm telling, like,
the line was ridiculous. They only had 5 polling stations inside of the place, and I vote here all the time. I vote here every year, and they usually have about 15 to 20, but it was in the name of social distancing that they only put 5 in there. Now, this is a huge church where the polling place is. They could have had more than 5 in there and still effectively socially distanced. Like, there's a stage. It was an auditorium.
And 5.
It's an auditorium. They had 5 machines in there. It was space enough to have 6 feet apart and still have at least 10 machines in there. And that would have, taken so much time off of that wait. And we were outside in the sun.
Crazy.
There was this summer, and it was crazy. But people were determined. Everybody stood in that line. We stood in that thing the whole 3 hours.
Handing out snacks and water and all kind of stuff to encourage people to just stay there and just get it done. That's the kind of work we got to do, though. Give people a ride. If your neighbors or family members, whoever don't have a ride, or Like, just we got to get creative and make a trip out of it. Hey, pack some snacks, give out some other little stuff, to encourage people to really just get out there. That's what I plan on doing. It's like my friends who I know who are talking about they ain't gonna vote. They don't see the point. Look, I'll send you a little money and get you a coffee or something. Go on up there and cast your vote. Whatever we got to do, we got to get creative.
And in metropolitans like Atlanta, like New York, they have early voting. I never vote on the day of.
Yeah.
I always early vote, and I walk in and walk out. I haven't voted on election day since probably like my first year voting. I think I voted for the governor of Georgia, stood in the line on election day, and I voted for Obama the first time on actual election day. But after that, I was like, oh, early voting is a thing. I found a precinct because it's a bunch of them in Atlanta. You can go to wherever you want to go for early voting, and then it doesn't have to be your polling place. Everybody's just in a central location, and early voting usually lasts for like a month, so you can cast your ballot and just be done with it. And you don't have to stand in a long line. You can go in the middle of the day. You can go on your lunch break. Like, it's not, you know what I mean? So there are options to make it a lot easier. And we have to find all of them and utilize them. But again, vote. That's wonderful. That's powerful. But your constituency goes beyond that. It's about making sure that we hold the people who are in office accountable, whoever they are. Even the current administration, we could have held them accountable.
Exactly.
By making the accurate phone calls to our Congress. And we talked about the executive branch is not at the top. It's right next to the legislative. It's right next to the judicial. There's checks and balances. So there are certain things the executive branch can't do without the legislative branch saying to okay it. Like only Congress can declare war on another nation. The president can't declare war. So if you're in communication with your local representative, which your congressperson is technically a local representative in a federal seat.
Right.
So you can talk to the person. You can impact how they vote on certain bills that come up. These are the things that we need to do. This is how we can push and prod a president. Because yes, as a individual constituent or a group of constituents, it's going to be difficult to reach the president. But you can get the president's ear by getting your Congress people to vote in certain ways. And then they're like, what's going on here? Oh, there's this block of people who are really mandating that their Congress people and their senators represent them in a certain way. And it's stopping
put the pressure on them
from being able to do things.
Exactly. We have to definitely put the pressure on them when they know that we're not making any demands, that we don't have any, agendas or requests or demands. Then they will do whatever they want, what they want to do, or they won't do anything.
Or they won't do anything.
They be in there scrolling, eating, doing whatever they want to do.
Like a puppet with no puppeteer, they would just be laying there. So it's our responsibility to know what our power is and to wield it and to really find value in it. There is so much that we have the power to do. And of course, like we've acknowledged, they don't teach us these things.
Right.
But we shouldn't leave it up to them to teach us in the first place.
Right. Exactly.
This is just one platform saying this, right? And we talked about the Paul Cuffeys and the Martin Delaney's, the David Walkers, who found education somewhere, but they understood the political system. They understood the power that they wield.
Yeah.
So they knew the game.
You don't have to, and again, you don't have to know all the in the little intricate details and everything, right? It only takes a few of us, and I think that's where the responsibility falls on a lot of us who do know, a little bit more about it. I think we tend to hoard information sometimes and like hold it against people. I see every time these conversations come up around election years, and you get to blaming people who didn't do, saying who didn't do or he didn't go what way. It is our responsibility to break it down to those who don't have the time, the education, you know what I mean, and stuff to learn about this stuff, because we do get a little bit more access when, I guess, those of us who either some of us had parents or other family members or mentors, somebody who taught us about it. Some of us had, where at our higher education, we got more access to this information. So it's our responsibility to break it down to people to understand instead of just blaming them when we don't get the desired, results. So, I mean, but that's what my hopes are, is for us to be able to reach people to kind of break it down and put it more to relatable terms and situations and different examples and throughout history to where people can see it and relate to it a little bit better.
And our entire show next week is going to be dedicated to showing ways to use your constituency. Mm-hmm. Our highlight reels and our Monday morning quarterbacks will be people and situations where people use their political prowess, their agenda setting ability to dictate and mandate certain things to change and how it advanced us. Right. So we're not just talking hot air. Right. Today's show was just dedicated to just getting the idea of please use this right. And that it's not something that we just slipped up upon. It's something that we fought for over 100 years and are still fighting for it now in different ways. But from that 1877 to 1965 period of time, it was a brutal. And to dishonor the people who fought in that time period is shameful.
When it was dangerous for them, they risked their lives, right? They didn't go there expecting or wanting to die, but they knew that it was a very real threat to their lives, and they did it anyway, right? So what is our excuse? You're not at risk of dying right now to be able to have that, to exercise that right. And again, think about it from the standpoint like, okay, yeah, that's something that they wanted to do, but they saw that it was necessary to get the things that we need. And we can't complain. Again, we cannot complain if we're not going to do the work. You're going to throw up the white flag. Do not complain about the other team, getting the victory because you didn't even try to win. But that time period between, even after, we get to 1965 when we got the Voting Rights Act, 2013, the Supreme Court rolled back that Voting Rights Act. They took it back to where they didn't have to enforce these states, enforce the law, in these states to still grant us the right to vote, right? So again, we go back to state laws and how people are able to change things up, right? Because it's not the same between every state right now. And it never was. Like, there are some people who they have much stricter rules and regulations to keep people out. And so of course in those southern states that we know, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and all of this stuff, these people, you already know they don't want you to vote, and so they're going to make it more difficult. So we do see it in more heavily in states like that where they come up with more ridiculous laws and they are able to restrict, like polling places and make it, less possible for people to exercise their right to vote. But we got to think about that's 2013 in the Supreme Court. We have Ruth just died a week ago. That's a Supreme Court seat open, right? That could potentially be filled by this man who we know don't care about us and is completely against us. Do we really want him to get somebody that favors his, him and his thinking? Do we want somebody like that in the Supreme Court? See, again, this is a lifelong appointment. Lifelong. even if we say that, okay, well, the voting is not important, we just need to focus on ourselves, we need to do this and that. If we try to do this and that, whatever this and that is, if we try to be on our own, guess who will have the power to strike it down? The Supreme Court.
Guess who has the power to make amendments to the Constitution?
So
the
that
Supreme Court.
Exactly. We can't say that this is not important. It's very important. Even like, of course, definitely locally, because that's something that you can feel. You see those people, you can go walk up to them, you can contact their office, you can call them, write them, all of this stuff. But this seat is also very important. And these, the president is not the only person, but understand, like, these people higher up, in this other system, they do have control, like, of picking these people. Trump just picked over 300 federal judges or something like that, and these are like younger, conservative white males mostly, who most likely
emphasis
think like
on
them.
Young, who are going to be in these seats for a long time.
They're not dying. Well, unless they die, they're not leaving those seats anytime soon. So we have to think more. They are definitely thinking like more strategically, and we have to really be up on game. We have to learn. We are on the court, we are on the field. We have to learn the game, right? It is not we're not throwing up a white flag, because guess what? We're leaving that burden up to the future generations. We throw up the white flag, that is making it harder on them. And it's a lot that can change, a lot more amendments and different things that can change and make it even more difficult for them. So it's not a choice. Really, it's literally not a choice right now. We have to learn.
My thing is, amendments to the Constitution are very fickle. They are not in the main document, which means they are add-ons to the end, they're taglines. And those taglines can be changed. Just look at the 18th and the 21st. The 18th Amendment is prohibition. It outlawed alcohol. The 21st Amendment undoes prohibition, and now it allows alcohol. That's two amendments to the Constitution. They didn't erase the 18th Amendment. It's still there. But it's irrelevant because the 21st is there now. It nullifies it. So remember, our status as not being enslaved, of being citizens, and our right to vote, all are amendments to the Constitution.
I'm telling you. And before we know it, that mess will be rolled right back. It will be rolled back. We cannot play with this.
So we had better wield this power while we have it.
Yes.
And set our agendas. And make sure that we know what's going on, and make sure that we mandate that our agendas are met. We mandate, because we are being taxed, our funds are being taxed, that we get proper representation. We pull a Paul Cuffey and use their words against them. We need to know what's happening.
Paul, that's why I love that. That's why I love how we highlight these people who are living examples of of this. And this is during the time of enslavement. This man, was able to go. He went and said, wait a minute, how you going to tax me, but I don't have the right to vote? You just fought. Y'all just fought and said that you are not going to be taxed without representation. So why should I? He challenged that. Like, we got to think of these. We have to be bold, even though we don't see it. We don't know that it's possible. We still have to push. That's how any of these changes have been able to be made, is still people pushing, even when they didn't see that it was possible. It is still our responsibility to do so. It's so important. It's so important.
One of the things that kind of confuses people, and this goes to your point, so make sure you have your video queued up, is people don't understand the electoral process, especially when it comes to the federal presidential elections, like this electoral college. And to be honest with you, the way I learned about the electoral college is the founding fathers just didn't trust the American citizens.
Yeah.
And at the time, it was only landowning white men who could vote. They did not trust the intelligence of them to be able to adequately choose the leadership. And we're going to make it we're going to give you the sense
Right.
that you're voting for your leadership, right?
Yeah.
It's still representative democracy.
Because I think we look at it as like it's a mystical, this thing that is untouchable, that these are people, again, representatives from our area. These are people who are placed into given this responsibility. So we have to pay attention to this stuff, right? We have to know.
Each state has different requirements and ways that they choose their electors to sit in the electoral college. So in your state, it's necessary for you to look up how your state determines who's going to be in the electoral college and how they, how they choose them, how they're there, who they are,
and how they cast their votes, right? Because again, these are things that's not set in stone. We're gonna learn some of the things about it. So we'll talk about it after we watch the video. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Most people have heard of the Electoral College during presidential election years. But what exactly is the Electoral College? Simply said, it is a group of people appointed by each state who formally elect the President and Vice President of the United States. To understand how this process began and how it continues today, we can look at the Constitution of the United States. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of the Constitution. It specifies how many electors each state is entitled to have. Since 1964, there have been 538 electors in each presidential election. How do they decide on the number 538? Well, the number of electors is equal to the total voting membership of the United States Congress, 435 representatives plus 100 senators and 3 electors from the District of Columbia. Essentially, the Democratic candidate and Republican candidate are each trying to add up the electors in every state so that they surpass 270 electoral votes, or just over half of 538 votes, and win the presidency. So how do states even get electoral votes? Each state receives a particular number of electors based on population size. The census is conducted every 10 years, so every time the census happens, states might gain or lose a few electoral votes. Let's say you're a voter in California, a state with 55 electoral votes. If your candidate wins in California, they get all 55 of the state's electoral votes. If your candidate loses, they get none. This is why many presidential candidates want to win states like Texas, Florida, and New York. If you currently add up the electoral votes of those 3 states, you would have 96 electoral votes. Even if a candidate won North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, Vermont, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and West Virginia, they would only gain 31 electoral votes total from those 8 states. Here's where it can get a little tricky. On a rare occasion, like in the year 2000, someone can win the popular vote but fail to gain 270 electoral votes. This means that the winner may have won and collected their electoral votes by small margins, winning just enough states with just enough electoral votes, but the losing candidate may have captured large voter margins in the remaining states. If this is the case, the very large margins secured by the losing candidate in the other states would add up to over 50% of the ballots cast nationally. Therefore, the losing candidate may have gained more than 50% of the ballots cast by voters, but failed to gain 270 of the electoral votes. Some critics of the Electoral College argue the system gives an unfair advantage to states with large numbers of electoral votes. Think of it this way. It is possible for a candidate to not get a single person's vote, not one vote, in 39 states or the District of Columbia, yet be elected president by winning the popular vote in just 11 of these 12 states: California, New York, Texas, Florida, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, New Jersey, North Carolina, Georgia, or Virginia. This is why both parties pay attention to these states. However, others argue that the Electoral College protects small states such as Rhode Island, Vermont, and New Hampshire, and even geographically large states with small populations like Alaska, Wyoming, and the Dakotas. That's because a candidate can't completely ignore small states, because in a close election, every electoral vote counts. There are certain states that have a long history of voting for a particular party. These are known as safe states. For the past 4 election cycles, in 1996, 2000, 2004, and 2008, Democrats could count on states like Oregon, Maryland, Michigan, and Massachusetts, whereas the Republicans could count on states like Mississippi, Alabama, Kansas, and Idaho. States that are teetering between parties are called swing states. In the past 4 election cycles, Ohio and Florida have been swing states, twice providing electoral votes for a Democratic candidate and twice providing electoral votes for a Republican candidate. Think about it. Do you live in a safe state? If so, is it a Democratic or Republican safe state? Do you live in a swing state? Are your neighboring states swing or safe? Is the population in your state increasing or decreasing? And do not forget, when you're watching the electoral returns on election night every 4 years and the big map of the United States is on the screen, know that the magic number is 270 and start adding.
All right.
Yeah, so a lot of information that we just don't get all the time, and a lot of stuff that we just don't know, right? Yeah. So understanding how the Electoral College works, like I said, look at your state and see how your electors are appointed, how they're given that position, who they are, how they vote, their voting history, and see if there are ways to hold them accountable in your state. And, you know, all this stuff, we just have to be diligent. We have to just continue to learn, continue to know how the sausage is made.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
And
the ingredients.
And be a part of it.
Because
put your stamp on it.
Right. I mean, that's the thing, though. It's like I think the system it is like I think I was looking at I like to look at how other countries operate, you know, and even practice some of these same systems that we have, like when it comes to elections and stuff, when it comes to campaigning, all of this, like America we tend to put on like it's like a big circus act, right? Even with how much money it's a ridiculous amount of money that America puts into elections and things like that like no other country, a lot of other countries don't even come close to it, right? And also looking at how the people, the citizens, how they take voting so seriously. And I know this from being a global citizen myself, right? Or just, you know, just traveling around the world and seeing how close people are and like understanding that it is their duty. There are a lot of countries I think that we can learn from just by seeing, like from the example, seeing how serious it is, right? It is some people's duty, like they have to. Some people can get in trouble for not participating. You can get fined. You can get, you know, in trouble in different ways for not participating. You have to cast your vote, right? Think about how they make it, you know, how they parade, you know, around, and how they try to pander to us, you know, like, you know, that it's important. We have to understand how to use it. And I think it's also because I think a lot of people we come down on our community a lot about not participating, about not voting. A lot of us don't, you know, we see that a lot of times, you know, that like when it came to who was that voting for Hillary, even though she lost the main vote, you know, she got the popular vote. Who carried that though? It was majority, well, Black women, right? We're at the top of that, right? So a lot of us do, but enough of us are not, like, to really have the impact. We got to consider our population in the whole country, right? Think about our population in those states. Again, like we just showed, like that process of the Electoral College and how that works. They pointed out like how some states are, you know, they just have this like, well, we'll just go with what the majority of the state goes with. But then you have cases where they don't want to stick, you know, by that. And these people can, you know, swing the vote to wherever they want. You have to pay attention. If you live in those states, like she was saying in that video, if you live in one of those states, you need to be paying attention. And those are the people you can be putting the pressure on, like, hey, we want you to vote this way. And like, go in groups. Again, you have to be writing your letters and calling, whatever you guys have to do, and I live in the most populous state, right? We got 55 votes, and that is important. I think California is one of those states where it is, I think they do go with the majority, but I mean, it's so crazy though, how this all works. And it does seem like a scam, but understand the people who want it to be like a scam, right? They're still going through the system. They're putting the laws in all of the amendments and all of this stuff. They are the ones pushing. They are still participating in this judicial system to put these laws and these things on the books to make us more, disadvantaged, to hold us back. So they are not forfeiting. They're not throwing up the white flag. They're constantly working. And that's something that we have to realize. We don't forfeit when we know that our enemy is working already 10 times harder, to keep us oppressed, to keep us locked out of the system. We just have to take it more seriously.
There's been a lot of talk about leveraging our vote, right? And not just selling it off to, to one party,
right?
And making this one party not have to earn our vote,
right?
That I'm 100% behind that. But also remember, and I will keep saying this, it's beyond the vote. We can hold them accountable once they're in office as well. So we don't have to just leverage the vote, but in the election year, we can leverage our political power during their term and tell them these are the things that we want. It comes back to setting that agenda, though. There has to be an agenda set with bullet points that you can document the success. Okay, you've done this task, you've done that task, you satisfied this request, so that we can show and prove that, okay, these are the things that they have done. We can show these are the stats of what they did for our community in that term, during this presidency, during this Senate seat office term, whatever it is, so that we can determine if these people actually align with us politically.
Right.
And we can start to make determinations from there. We also need to start pulling some things from the past where they raised up their own future representatives. Like they saw a smart kid in high school and it was like, that kid is going to be a great politician one day. We're going to indoctrinate him in the ways and needs of this community so that when we run him for office, he will reflect back on what we need him to be, or what we need her to be. So those are some
requirements
things
met. That's what the mob does, right? Like that's what I was talking about.
That's what I'm talking about.
In the movie, one of my favorite movies, in The Departed, and they raised this boy. They made sure he didn't have that record. He didn't have a bad record, right? They needed this boy to go to school and get him on the inside. This is what we have to do. That's the kind of planning we have to do. We see it all the time. They do it all the time.
We don't have to worry about, okay, is that person who is Black, are they really for me?
Right.
Well, you raised them. So yes, they are. That's our agent in the system.
I'm telling you.
And we're holding them accountable too. And we're giving them the support, because holding somebody accountable isn't always punitive. It's also showing support that you have their back when it's time for them to push the things that they want, when there's time for them to push the bills. Just like I hear a lot of complaints about Barack Obama, what he didn't do. But I don't remember us using our sway as constituents to really sway our Congress people to not sit on those bills when he was proposing them. So as much as we feel like he let us down, we let him down, because he said, yes, we can. His whole political thing was, yes, we can. He never said, yes, I, one person, am about to change the situation for everybody. He said, yes, we can. And his whole campaign was built on this idea of a collective process.
Exactly. Imagine though, if we eliminate this idea of disappointment when it comes to like whatever candidate, whatever politician or whatever. It should not matter who. Even if we happen to end up with another 4 years of Trump, we still go along with our agenda, getting our demands met. You do not throw up the white flag. It doesn't even matter who is in office. But when we had someone like a Barack Obama in office, we should have taken full advantage of that, of having him in office. And he was in office for 8 years, but we'll sit here and complain about how because we think, and that's what shows me how detached we are just from this idea of how the system works. We talk about, like, I hear people talking about how, well, he gave so-and-so these rights, he gave this and that. He didn't give them. They demanded. They went and made sure that they had their list of demands and their requests and things like that, and made sure that they got the stuff checked off of their list. Did we do the same, or did we expect just because this man looks like us that he's just going to do all the things? He can't even do that. First of all, he can't even have the power to just say, "Oh, well, let me make up some things, that I can do for the Black community." No, Black community. It is our job, no matter who is in office, to go with our list of demands. It is not, we don't ever put full trust in the politician. So it's not, we don't get emotionally involved with them to where they are able to disappoint us in that way. We take the emotion out of it. We have an agenda.
I always say the Tea Party made Barack Obama show his birth certificate.
I'm telling you, right?
And we know the Tea Party were not the people who voted for President Obama. So they still had enough power, organization, an agenda, as dumb as it was set. It had money behind it, and they swayed the president to do something that he didn't feel like he needed to do, because he didn't need to do it. But they wouldn't go away. They were like gnats. And we have to be the same way. We got to be like gnats. If it's Trump, if it's Biden, if it's the green alien from Mars, we have to be like gnats with our agenda and not go away. You ever just walk through some gnats? It is the most annoying thing, because they just be right there and you don't see them until you all the way up on them.
Right.
And it's like, ugh.
Flying up in your nose and your mouth. Right.
We got to be like gnats.
Yeah,
that's how annoying and consistent and unassuming we have to be.
Yeah.
Sometimes they can't see us coming, but when we are there, we're everywhere.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
Just like my mother just said, like we were talking about raising your candidates, the Kennedys. Kennedy's father, he got his money bootlegging. We know this now. The Kennedy money, Kennedy fortune was illegal, right? But he was like, okay, I'm gonna make this money this way, and then we're gonna go straight, and then my son, one of them, is gonna be the president of the United States. Now the whole plan was for it to be his oldest son, who we don't even know his name because he died in the war.
Yeah.
And then it passed down to John. John got elected president. He did not want to be president. If you know anything about Jack Kennedy, he didn't want to be president. That was his brother's thing.
Right.
And then his father was like, hey, listen, you got my name, you're gonna be president.
Okay.
You're gonna do this. Like, there is no option. What you said, you want to do something. That's not how this works. And then when he went away, his other Bobby ran. And so it was a mandate. This is how we have to run our communities. We have to choose the candidates from like middle school. Trust me, there's some people showing potential.
Exactly. I'm telling you,
go to them award. Just be sitting in the awards program. The whole community need to be at the local high school's award program. You're like, okay, this one.
Okay, scouts. You need to be
that
scouts.
person. We need to be scouting. Oh my God, back to sports. We need to scout our politicians like we need to draft them out of high school.
Yep.
Okay, that's a good mayor. Oh, that's a good city council. Oh, that's a good school board person right there. That's a good superintendent. That's a good senator right there. Okay, that person can ride. Oh, that's a good governor. We need to be scouting them.
Absolutely.
From middle school and raising them up to make sure that their record is clean, that everything is legit, and that they understand the needs of the community and that they represent them.
And understanding, because a lot of times, you know, they don't have to come from these picture perfect families and, you know, these backgrounds and stuff. Because a lot of times we will find like those skin folk who ain't kin folk, right? They're people of other they live in their own communities. They look like us, but they are not necessarily for us. So we have to make sure the people who are going to actually be for us. And that's the thing you just brought up a little while ago about we don't have to question, you know, when we don't have to question who, even just because they Black, if they really for us, right?
Right.
We have to think of that. And that's why I think a lot of we suffer a lot of times in that way. We do have a lot of good people, you know, in our community who want to do well, who want to do good for us and willing to put in the work, you know, for us. And I think this is why when we think about like what we can do as individuals and just on a day-to-day basis, not only thinking about politics, not only thinking about 1 or 2 times, you know, or every other year or something, think about what you could be doing. Let's check up on, we need to bring our village back. Let's check up on our neighbors and make sure that we're mentoring somebody. You don't know the influence that you can have, you know, on someone who could be our next president or, you know, mayor, governor, school, you know, superintendent or whatever, you know, to make our community better. We have to pour the love into the people in our community. So we're going to get, you know, so that we get it back. We have to sow the seeds basically, you know, and I think that's just so important. We have to bring back this idea of the village, not just the idea, bring back the village. We have to rebuild that because it won't get better. We just say we do get a couple things, you know, on the books. Are we as a community intact, you know, to be able to maintain it, you know, because it's not going to be one, you know, oh, well, we got it. Again, they're constantly going to be working. We have to constantly work to maintain whatever victories that we do get, right? Whatever new pieces, we have to make sure we keeping it up. You know, it's going to be, we're going to need to modernize, you know, a few years later, make sure that the next generation is up and educated and motivated to continue to fight, because it's not going to be a one-time thing. It's not a one solution fix, you know, and so that's so important. We got to bring it back to the community, to the family.
Yeah. None of this happens in a vacuum. There are going to be multiple layers, multiple levels, and multiple aspects of how we attack these things. Like we say, it's political, it's economical, it's social, it's cultural. It's all of those things at the same time, not one over the other. It's not one before the other. It's all of them collective, which is why collaboration is needed, because somebody is an economics expert. Somebody is a political expert. Somebody is a social science expert. Somebody is a political science expert. Somebody understands how to culturally manifest these things in our education and all that stuff. Somebody is an academic. Somebody is a trade worker, right?
Somebody is an agitator, activist, right? You
exactly.
Know, exactly. That need all of these levels. It's not that, oh, well, this method is outdated. This thing is outdated. Why are we still doing this? No, we need to be doing this and this and this and that. It's so many different parts, pieces to the puzzle. So, I mean, I think we can do it. We can definitely do it, but we have to like really just, again, bring up these things that happened in the past, make our people more aware, educated on it. That's when we say knowledge is key, right? Knowledge is so powerful, and it's just showing like what we don't know. We won't you won't have the knowledge. And so how would you know to go for you? How would you know how to play? So let's learn these rules. Let's learn
the rules and use them to our benefit. Like we said, propaganda is not bad itself.
Okay.
Because we can use it to get our message across.
Yes.
Just like in World War II, there was propaganda supporting the Nazis. There was propaganda supporting America. It was propaganda on both sides. It's just all on what your agenda is and you getting your agenda across. So we can use it for our benefit as well. Michelee, let the people know how they can find you and support you.
You can find my website at mishmashworld.com and my business Instagram at mishmashworld, and just I guess on my regular social media, which I'm disabling my Twitter. I'm sorry. I just can't do all this social media right now. I'm trying to stay focused, man. I got some goals. I picked up some new projects. So, but if you want to get in touch with me, sure, you can get in touch with me there. But I appreciate it, brother.
And no problem. And if you need any more information about African Unity Initiative as an organization, please visit our website at africanunity.us and find us on all social media platforms at Afrikan Unity. African with a K, as always. This has been a great show. I wanted to say this because we got a comment that said, I wonder how things are going to change with Trump and Melania getting COVID. Well, I guess it's not fake news anymore. So it's just a crazy show. We'll see what happens with that. But just make sure that y'all vote and tune in next week when we gonna do a deep dive, all 4 episodes, on how the political actions of people with a set agenda actually made differences.
Right.
So we'll see you guys then. Peace.
All right. Peace. Have a good weekend.